My name is Vanessa Coleman. I am 34 years old, and I'm from Austin, Texas. For most of my life, I believed the story my dad told everyone about my mom, that she was reckless with money, unstable, and the reason our family always struggled. He repeated it so often that eventually everyone believed him, even me. But after my mom passed away, a dusty storage unit she secretly kept for years revealed a truth none of us were prepared for. What I found inside didn't just expose a lie, it uncovered 25 years of financial betrayal, manipulation, and a secret my father never thought anyone would discover. What would you do if the person you trusted most rewrote your family's entire history, and you didn't realize it for decades? What if your father spent 25 years telling the world your mom was crazy with money, while secretly draining every account she ever had? And what if the only thing your mother left behind wasn't money or a house or a will, but a locked storage unit full of evidence she knew one day you'd find died in? Why would a woman hide financial records for 2.5 decades instead of confronting her husband? And when I finally opened those boxes, why did I realize my father's biggest lie had just collapsed? For as long as I can remember, my father controlled the story of our family's finances, and the story he told over and over again was always the same. According to him, my mom was terrible with money. He said it casually at first, at dinner tables, during arguments, on phone calls with relatives. During arguments, on phone calls with relatives. It slowly became one of those phrases people repeated without thinking. Your mom just isn't responsible with money. Your mother's spending again. She's always been a little unstable when it comes to finances. At first, I didn't question it. I was a kid. When one parent says something with absolute certainty, you believe them. My dad spoke like a man who was constantly cleaning up someone else's mess, like he was the responsible one carrying the burden of a chaotic partner. And the strange part? He didn't just tell us, he told everyone. Family gatherings became quiet lectures about my mom's poor decisions. I remember him standing in my aunt's kitchen once, shaking his head dramatically while explaining how another savings account had mysteriously emptied. Vanessa's mom just doesn't think things through, he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. My mom would stand nearby, silent. Not arguing, not defending herself. Not arguing, not defending herself. Just quietly washing dishes or staring down at the table like she'd heard it 1,000 times before. Back then, I thought her silence meant guilt. Now I know it meant something else entirely. Over the years, the narrative grew stronger. My dad said he had to manage all the finances because my mom couldn't be trusted. He controlled the bank accounts, handled the bills, and monitored every purchase. If the electricity bill was late, it was my mom's fault. If a credit card balance was high, it was because she went shopping again. If money was tight, he'd sigh deeply and tell me the same thing he'd told everyone else. You know your mom, that phrase became the explanation for everything. And the more he repeated it, the more people believed it. Relatives stopped discussing money with my mom altogether. If there was a financial conversation during family gatherings, everyone instinctively looked at my dad instead. He was the responsible one, the stable one, the one keeping the family afloat. Meanwhile, my mom's reputation slowly crumbled. I remember overhearing whispers at a barbecue once. She's lucky he handles everything. One of my cousins' evidence in a courtroom. This is exactly what I'm talking about, he'd say. And every time he said it, the image of my mom as the irresponsible one grew stronger in everyone's minds, including mine. Looking back now, I realized something chillin'. My father didn't just accuse my mom once. He built an entire identity for her. He repeated it for so many years, in so many rooms, to so many people, that it became the official story of our family. And once a story becomes official, people stop looking for the truth. But what none of us knew back then was this. While my dad was telling the world my mom was reckless, unstable, and irresponsible, my mom was quietly collecting evidence. Evidence that would one day prove the biggest lie in our family had been carefully built for 25 years. As I got older, something about our family's finances started to feel strange. Not dramatic, not obvious, just small things that didn't quite add up. Growing up, my mom worked hard. She wasn't unemployed or careless, like my dad always suggested. She had steady jobs, sometimes 2 at a time. I remember her leaving early in the morning with coffee in one hand and her work bag in the other, promising she'd be back before dinner. So naturally, I assumed that between 2 working parents, our family would be financially comfortable. But somehow, we never were. There was always this feeling of barely getting by. Bills were always tight, savings were always low, and whenever money disappeared, the explanation was always the same. Your mom spent it. At first I believed it. I mean, that's what everyone said. But as the years passed, little details started catching my attention. For example, my mom rarely bought things for herself. She didn't have expensive clothes. Her car was old and unreliable. She used the same purse for nearly a decade. The idea that she was secretly spending huge amounts of money never really matched the way she lived. Still, whenever a financial problem appeared, my dad had a story ready-wise. One time, I remember overhearing a heated conversation in the kitchen. My dad was holding a bank statement in his hand, waving it around like proof in a courtroom. "Another withdrawal," he said sharply. $3,000 gone. My mom looked genuinely confused. "I didn't take that," she said quietly. My dad laughed in disbelief. "Then who did?" he replied. "The bank fairy." That moment stuck with me because of the look on my mom's face. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't defensiveness. It was confusion. But my dad didn't give her time to explain. He turned the conversation into another lecture about her spending habits, repeating the same lines he'd been using for years. "You see why I handle the accounts," he said. "This is exactly why." After that, the topic was closed. And that's how it always worked. Money would disappear. My mom would say she didn't spend it. My dad would accuse her anyway. Then the conversation would end with him, declaring that he had to fix the problem. As a teenager, I started noticing another strange pattern. Whenever my mom received a paycheck, the money seemed to vanish almost immediately. Sometimes she'd mention it casually. "I got paid yesterday," she'd say. But by the end of the week, she'd quietly mention that her account was nearly empty again. I remember once asking her about it. "Did you buy something?" I asked. She looked surprised by the question. "No," she said slowly. "Why would you think that?" I shrugged. "Dad says you spend a lot." For a moment, she just stared at me. Not angry, not defensive, just hurt. Then she forced a small smile and said something that confused me at the time. Sometimes the truth takes a long time to be seen. Back then, I didn't understand what she meant, but the strange financial problems kept happening. Savings accounts would suddenly close. New credit cards would appear in the mail under my mom's name. Bills would show balances she swore she'd already paid. Each time my dad reacted the same way, with frustration and dramatic disappointment. "See what I'm dealing with," he'd say to anyone who would listen. Relatives started shaking their heads sympathetically whenever money was mentioned. Some of them even began giving my dad advice on how to protect himself financially. And every time someone blamed my mom, she stayed quiet. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She just watched it happen. At the time, I thought her silence meant she didn't have proof. Years later, I would discover the truth. My mom wasn't staying silent because she had nothing to say. She was staying silent because she was building a record. While my dad accused her of spending money, while relatives whispered about her irresponsibility, while I slowly started believing the story too, my mom was quietly tracking every dollar that disappeared, every withdrawal, every transfer, every account that mysteriously emptied, and she was storing the evidence somewhere none of us knew existed. Somewhere that, one day, would explain exactly where all that missing money really went. 3 weeks after my mom passed away, I was still moving through life in a fog. Grief has a strange way of slowing everything down. The house felt quieter than it ever had before. Her coffee mug still sat in the cabinet. Her coat still hung by the door. Every corner of the house felt like a reminder of someone who had always been there, and suddenly wasn't. My dad, on the other hand, seemed oddly calm. He handled the funeral arrangements quickly, spoke politely to relatives, and returned to his normal routine, almost immediately. At the time, I assumed everyone just grieved differently. Though stay? And one afternoon, while sorting through a small box of my mom's paperwork, I found something that stopped me cold. It was a plain white envelope with my name written on the front in her handwriting. Inside were only 2 things: a small metal key and a folded piece of paper. The paper had a storage facility name printed at the top, along with a unit number. That was it. No explanation, no letter, no instructions. No letter, no instructions, just a key and a number. At first I thought maybe it was something simple, old furniture. Childhood items, maybe a few things she had kept from years ago. People rent storage units for all kinds of reasons, but something about it felt deliberate. My mom wasn't the type of person who paid for something she didn't need. And she definitely wasn't the type to keep secrets. At least, not the kind that involved rented storage units. The next morning, curiosity got the better of me. The facility was about 20 minutes outside the city, one of those quiet places surrounded by rows and rows of metal doors, each one hiding someone's forgotten belongings. The manager looked up my mom's name on the computer. When he confirmed the unit had been rented under her name, he said something that made my stomach tighten. "This one's been here a long time." "How long?" I asked. He checked the screen again. 25 years. I thought I had misheard him. 25 years. 25. He nodded. My mind started racing. 25 years meant my mom had rented that storage unit. For nearly my entire life. Why would someone hold on to a storage space for that long? What could possibly be inside that was important enough to keep for decades, yet hidden from everyone? The manager handed me the paperwork to sign, then walked me down a narrow row of units. The metal doors stretched endlessly on both sides, each one identical finally. He stopped. "Unit 317, he said. T. He left me there alone. For a moment, I just stood there staring at the lock. The metal key from the envelope felt heavy in my hand. My heart was beating faster than it should have been. Something about this didn't feel like normal storage. It felt like a message. I slid the key into the lock and turned it. The door rattled as it rolled upward, the sound echoing through the hallway. At first, I thought the unit was empty. Then my eyes adjusted to the dim light, and I realized the entire space was filled, not with furniture, not with boxes of clothes, but with bankers' boxes. Dozens of them. They were stacked carefully from the floor almost to the ceiling, forming rows that stretched all the way to the back wall. Every box was labeled in my mom's neat handwriting. Years, bank names, account numbers. I stepped inside slowly, running my fingers across the labels. Each box represented a different period of time, each one carefully organized, each one sealed shut like a time capsule. And that's when the realization hit me. My mom hadn't been storing random belongings. She had been archiving something. For 25 years. The deeper I walked into that unit, the heavier the air felt. Every box seemed to carry a piece of a story I didn't understand yet. But one thing was already clear. This wasn't a storage unit full of memories. It was a storage unit full of evidence. Evidence my mom had spent decades collecting, while everyone around her believed the story my father told. And standing there, surrounded by 25 years of sealed boxes, I suddenly understood something chilling. My mom didn't keep this place a secret because she was hiding something. She kept it a secret because one day someone would need to see the truth. Standing inside that storage unit felt like stepping into a version of my mom's life that none of us had ever seen. For 25 years, she had quietly built an archive. And now, surrounded by those neatly stacked bankers' boxes, I realized something that made my chest tighten. This wasn't random paperwork. This was organized evidence. I pulled one of the boxes down from the top of the stack. On the side in my mom's handwriting was a simple label. 2003 transfers. My hands were shaking slightly as I opened it. Inside were folders. Dozens of them, each carefully labeled with dates. Every document was arranged in chronological order, almost like someone preparing a case file. Bank statements, transaction records, printed emails, handwritten notes. The first statement I looked at showed something that immediately caught my attention, a withdrawal from my mom's account for $4,200. Next to it, my mom had written a small note in blue ink. I did not authorize this transfer. I flipped to the next document. Another withdrawal. Another handwritten note. Dad says I must have forgotten making this payment. My stomach started twisting. Page after page showed the same pattern. Money leaving my mom's accounts. Transfers moving to other accounts. Transfers moving to other accounts. And next to almost every transaction, my mom had written down exactly what happened afterward. What my dad said, how he explained it, what the bank told her. Sometimes the notes were calm and factual. Sometimes they sounded frustrated. Sometimes they sounded exhausted. One note stood out more than the others. Bank says signature matches mine. I know I didn't sign this. I sat down on one of the boxes, trying to process what I was seeing. My dad had always claimed my mom was irresponsible with money, that she made bad financial decisions. But these documents told a completely different story. The transactions weren't random purchases. They were structured transfers. Large amounts moving in precise patterns. Accounts opening and closing. Loans taken out in her name. Credit cards issued under her identity. And every time something happened, my dad had an explanation ready. She must have forgotten. She signed something without reading it. She's confused again. My mom had documented all of it, every argument, every suspicious withdrawal, every time someone believed my dad instead of her. Then I found a folder that made everything even worse. Inside were copies of bank authorization forms. Some had my mom's signature, but when I looked closer, the signatures didn't look quite right. They were close enough to pass, but not identical. Next to one of the documents, my mom had written, "I think he's signing for me." The words felt heavy on the page. For years, my dad had convinced everyone, including banks, that my mom was forgetful, careless, unstable with money. But the documents in front of me suggested something far more disturbing. Someone had been moving money through accounts in her name. Someone had been taking loans using her identity. Someone had been building a financial trail that made her look irresponsible. And my mom had spent decades trying to prove it. One box turned into two. Two boxes turned into two. Two boxes turned into 5. Hours passed while I sat there reading through records from different years. The deeper I went, the clearer the pattern became. Money leaving my mom's accounts. Money appearing in accounts connected to my father. Investments purchased under different names. Properties listed under shell accounts. It was like watching a puzzle slowly come together. And every piece pointed in the same direction. My dad hadn't been cleaning up my mom's financial mistakes. He had been creating them. All those years he spent telling relatives she was reckless. All those times he sighed about fixing her messes. All those lectures out why he needed to control the money, suddenly they made sense. He wasn't protecting the family. He was protecting his story. And the most chilling part, my mom had known exactly what was happening. She just couldn't prove it at the time. So instead, she did the only thing she could. She collected the truth, piece by piece, year after year, until one day, long after the lies had settled into everyone's minds, someone would open a storage unit and finally see what she had been trying to show the world all along. By the time I finished going through the storage unit, the sun had already started setting outside. I sat there on the concrete floor, surrounded by open boxes and scattered papers, trying to absorb the reality of what I had just discovered. For most of my life, I believed my father was the responsible one. The man who kept our family from falling apart financially. He had spent years presenting himself as the patient husband, dealing with an irresponsible partner. But the evidence stacked around me told a completely different story, and the more I read, the more one question burned in my mind. How could he have gotten away with this for so long? The answer was simple, because no one had ever challenged the story. Not relatives, not friends, not even me. For 25 years, my father had built a narrative so convincing that nobody thought to question it. He repeated the same lines so often that they became facts in people's minds. Your mom can't handle money. She forgets things. I'm just trying to protect our finances. Those phrases were the foundation of his entire image, and now I was holding proof that every one of them had been a lie. I carefully packed several of the most important folders into a bag and drove home that night with my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. The house looked exactly the same. Me as it always had. How this works. Me as it always had. But everything felt different. My dad was sitting in the living room watching television when I walked in. The same relaxed expression he always had after a normal day. For a moment, I just stood there looking at him. This was the man who had shaped my understanding of our family for decades. The man I trusted without question. The man who had convinced everyone that my mother was the problem. The man who had convinced everyone that my mother was the problem. "Where have you been?" he asked casually, not even looking away from the screen. I placed the bag on the kitchen table. "We need to talk," I said. He sighed slightly, like someone already annoyed by the conversation. "What about?" Instead of answering, I opened the bag and pulled out the first folder, then another, then another. Bank statements, transfer records, authorization forms. I spread them across the table slowly, giving him time to recognize what he was looking at. At first, he didn't react, but the moment his eyes landed on one of the documents with my mom's handwritten notes, his expression changed. Just slightly, but enough. "What is all this?" he asked. "You tell me," I replied. For the first time in my life, My father didn't immediately have an answer. He flipped through a few pages quickly, his movements becoming more tense with each document. "Where did you get this?" he asked sharply. "Mom's storage unit." The room went completely quiet. The confidence he carried for decades seemed to disappear in seconds. "A storage unit?" he repeated. "She kept records," I said. 25 years of them. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the papers like they were something dangerous. For years, my father had been the loudest voice in every conversation about money, the man who always had a confident explanation ready. But that night, he was silent. And that silence told me more than any confession ever could. Because when someone spends decades controlling the narrative, they rely on one thing above all else. No one finding the truth. But now the truth was sitting on the kitchen table. Every transfer, every forged form, every lie repeated over decades. And for the first time since I was a child, my father looked like a man. Truth finally comes out. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story. Also, I want to hear from you. Do you think the father knew the truth would eventually be exposed? Or did he believe he would get away with it forever? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, sometimes the most powerful revenge, snate loud. Sometimes it's simply the truth waiting patiently to be discovered.